Hi, this is Nahid, and welcome to our bonus video on needs, stress, and happiness. I want to spend a little bit more time on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I want to talk to you more about needs in general, specifically what happens in your life when all your needs are met versus what happens in your life when you have unmet needs. I think it's important to point out in that all my years of coaching, whenever I've worked with clients who are stuck, it's come down to a pattern of having unmet needs. And the only way to get them unstuck is to figure out how to get those needs met. So what this program is all about really is identifying what needs you have that are unmet and how to get them met. But in order to understand why this is even important, I think it makes sense to dive in a little bit deeper. So we already talked about how our biological purpose is to survive and reproduce. And I like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You may see other models of needs, and they all work. I like this model because it encompasses all of our human needs, and it's very intuitive. So when you look at the different categories of needs and you think about how humans are driven, it's pretty intuitive to understand that at the base of the pyramid, our physiological and biological needs would take the highest priority. In other words, we need to breathe air to survive. So if we don't have air, even for a minute, our life is threatened, our very life is threatened. And so if someone's holding your head underwater, or you're having an asthma attack, or you're in some other situation where you can't get air, you are feeling complete panic, and you're only driven to get air. That's all you're driven. Other needs, such as, water, food, becoming free from pain. If you're in physical pain, that would fall into this category. All of those tend to take precedence when you have a problem in those areas. But when all of your physiological and biological needs are met, then you simply don't think about them anymore. And you're focused on sort of moving up the pyramid. Safety, we talked about how in the United States, in wealthier nations, it often kind of coincides with our sense of financial security, but it essentially means that we feel like our life isn't threatened from something outside of us, or we're going to be sheltered from the weather. Love and belonging, we talked about how that's an important need, because as humans, we can't really survive on our own, and we need to be part of a tribe, and we need to connect with other people. We also need to have families and connect with others if we're going to reproduce. So there are some biological drives to do that, whether or not we feel that technically we could live alone in this world. And then self-esteem, think of it as status. So when you're in any kind of social community, we all want status in that community. We all want to feel secure in our position in that community. I didn't really talk much about self-actualization, because what I see with self-actualization, it's more of a drive towards expressing yourself based on your values, more following your curiosity. So if you think about how you're in a state of being where everything's just fine. You feel secure in your status. You have great tribe. All your physiological needs are met. You feel safe. You don't have money worries. You don't have love worries. Typically, we're driven by our curiosity. We're driven by our values, which are things that we enjoy, or things that we care about, or things that are important to us. So whether politics is important to us, or whether our families are important to us, but we tend to be driven by our values. And in Maslow's situation, he specifically was driven more by continuous improvement. So that's kind of what he put at the top. But my interpretation of this is anything, some people are driven by continuous self-improvement. I tend to fall into that category. But a lot of people are driven by other things, like making an impact on the world. But you get to be driven by whatever your values are once you have all your needs met. In other words, everything that's necessary for you to survive is taken care of. Then you get to focus on what you'll actually enjoy. So that's the way the pyramid works. Where people have trouble in life is not spending enough time up at the top of the pyramid and just getting stuck at the bottom of the pyramid. But it's important to understand how that actually shows up in your life on a day-to-day basis. And if you've had any training or you've noticed anything, gone to any speaking engagements, there's a lot of talk about neuroscience these days. And people talk about neuroleadership. People bring neuroscience into discussions about coaching and self-development because there are so many new studies being done that actually examine what happens in a human being's brain when they're under stress. And you may have heard of something called an amygdala hijacking. A lot of people use that to refer to an uncontrolled emotional reaction. An uncontrolled emotional reaction is driven by the amygdala in your brain. It's a more primitive part of your brain. So if you think of it in evolutionary terms, as animals who don't have language, your emotions tend to be your signals that something's important. So you have a biological signal when you have an emotion. An emotion will send a surge through your body and wake you up and make you pay attention to something. So when we think about a need being unmet, if you go back down to the physiological level, because that's the easiest to understand, what you can imagine is if suddenly someone's holding your head underwater and you don't have air, how is that going to feel? Well, you can imagine how it's going to feel. You're going to start feeling a sense of panic. You're going to feel that adrenaline. Well, let's take a completely different situation. Let's say you're in the workplace and you're at a meeting and someone stands up and takes credit for the project that you've been working on, that you worked really hard on and that you were really proud of. And there they are claiming it to be their project right in front of the big boss. You're going to feel a similar surge, very similar to if someone was holding your head underwater. You're going to feel that threat, that something is going on that's threatening you and you need to do something about it. Now, you might not feel like you're actually going to die, but your body's actually acting that way. Your body's saying, here is a threat, and I need to do something about it. Maybe in this case, my status is being threatened, but I still feel that surge of emotion. So they talk a lot in neuroscience about having your prefrontal cortex, which can stop the amygdala from doing something crazy as a result of this uncontrolled emotional reaction. But emotional reactions, I want you to think of them as just signals. Stress signals, threat signals. And any time you have an unmet need, you're going to have some kind of a stress or a threat signal. So for example, let's say that you have a crush on somebody or you really care about someone and they reject you. You're going to have that same kind of emotional surge. Or let's say you have a group of friends and you find out they all had a party and they didn't invite you. You might feel that same kind of surge of threat. Or suddenly you see your bank account and you realize that you don't have enough money to pay the mortgage and you don't know where money's coming in next month. Another surge of emotion. So what we're doing is we're looking for those surges of emotions because what happens as a result of those surges of emotions isn't always effective in taking care of the situation. It might have been, several thousand years ago, if there's a tiger, it makes, kind of threatening you, it makes sense to run or to fight. But sometimes running, fighting, fight, flight, or freeze doesn't work in today's society. So here are some examples of people kind of having stress reactions, feeling rejected, feeling overwhelmed, feeling panicked because something isn't happening. At an emotional level, at a deep level, that's fight, flight, or freeze. The unfortunate thing, and you can see this maybe not so much in yourself, but you may have had situations yourself where you've had an emotional reaction and then you've regretted it later. But you can also see this in other people, when you see other people, quote unquote, losing it, when they start getting really emotional, really upset. Typically, when you get really emotional and really upset, nothing good happens. In other words, people are reacting to your reaction. They're feeling disrespected. The reaction looks immature, and it makes it really difficult to function. So what we all kind of ideally want is to be confident, to be peaceful, to be happy. And this state of well-being and confidence and feeling empowered, this is what we actually feel in our bodies when we have all our needs met. So the goal of personal growth is to get to a point where you have enough self-awareness so that you can manage your needs. And most of the time, be in a state where all of your needs are met so that you're not falling into crazy emotional reactions that are stressing you out physically, but are also causing problems with people you're in relationships with. Imagine if you were in that meeting where the person threw you under the bus and you stood up and started shouting in the meeting. He's not the one that's going to look bad. You're the one that's going to look bad. So that's what we're working towards. When you work on your trigger log, one of the things we're looking at is when you have those surges of emotions. So that's what a trigger log is. When am I triggered? When am I having a surge of emotion? We usually try to just shove those feelings down or handle it in some somewhat professional way. Or then sometimes we just let loose and just do whatever our emotions tell us to do. But regardless, it's important to understand what is triggering you. Because what we're going to find out is that every one of us has a pattern, and every one of us is triggered by different things. So in some of the other classes, we'll talk about why that is. But for now, the important thing to understand is one of the most important things that you can do in this program is have a really good trigger log so that you can see the patterns, so that you can see when you get triggered and what's going on in those moments. So when you see the needs column where it says, what did I most need in this moment? Another thing you can ask yourself is, what felt threatened? Did my identity feel threatened? Did my ego feel threatened? Did my sense of safety feel threatened? Did my sense of being included in the group feel threatened? So those are some questions that you can ask yourself as you're thinking about filling out this column. This trigger log is a very powerful document. You are going to keep going back to it anytime you want to grow to a next level, because this is the foundation. Anywhere that you can possibly be on your path of personal growth, if you want to say to yourself, how can I get to the next level? You can simply create a trigger log and say, what's triggering me now? Because whatever is triggering you now is where you feel threatened and where you break down in your ability to be effective. And if we can zero in on that, then we can get you to your next level of effectiveness at any point in your spectrum of growth. So that's why this is so exciting. So I hope that this video was a little bit insightful and gave you a little bit more clarity on needs. We'll have a few more bonus videos throughout the program. Continue to do your work on your trigger log and enjoy.